A babysitter secretly starved and abused a child. Then a K9 smashed through a window and took her down himself. The sun dipped low over the quiet suburban neighborhood as the Petersons pulled into their driveway after another long day at work. Mark and Jennifer were a hard-working couple, putting in endless hours to provide for their 6-year-old son Oliver. As they stepped out of the car, a young woman emerged from their front door, a bright smile on her face. Oliver was an absolute angel today, Melissa Hayes said sweetly, handing Oliver's backpack to Jennifer. We had so much fun together. Jennifer returned the smile, though exhaustion tugged at the corners of her mouth. Thank you so much, Melissa. We don't know what we'd do without you. Mark nodded in agreement, fishing out his wallet to pay Melissa for the day. Same time tomorrow? Of course, I'll be here bright and early, Melissa replied, pocketing the cash. With a final wave, she strode down the driveway and disappeared around the corner. Inside the house, Oliver sat quietly on the couch, his small frame hunched over. Jennifer sank down beside him, pulling him into a hug. How was your day, sweetie? Oliver hesitated, his eyes darting to the floor. It was okay, he mumbled. Mark ruffled Oliver's hair as he passed by. Okay? Just okay? I thought Melissa said you two had a blast today. A flicker of something unreadable passed over Oliver's face, but it was gone in an instant. He forced a smile. Yeah, it was fun. I'm just tired. Jennifer exchanged a glance with Mark, a flicker of concern in her eyes. But the moment passed, and they settled into their evening routine, unaware of the secrets lurking beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life. Miles away, in the heart of the city, Officer Daniel Cruz sat behind the wheel of his police cruiser, his loyal German Shepherd Titan alert in the back seat. They had been partners for years, an unbreakable bond forged through countless hours of training and real-world experience. Daniel reached back, scratching Titan behind the ears. Another quiet day, buddy, but we've got to stay sharp. Never know when someone might need us. Titan let out a low bark, his keen eyes scanning the streets as they drove. He was a highly skilled police dog, renowned for his uncanny ability to sense danger and distress. Daniel trusted Titan's instincts above all else. As they cruised through the city, Daniel's thoughts wandered to his own family, his wife Maria and their twin daughters. He knew all too well the evil that could lurk behind closed doors, the monsters that could hide in plain sight. It was his job to protect the innocent, to be a voice for the voiceless. And with Titan by his side, he knew they could take on anything. The radio crackled to life, dispatch relaying a nearby domestic disturbance. Daniel flipped on the sirens, adrenaline surging through his veins. Duty calls, Titan. Let's roll. In the Peterson home, the days fell into a predictable rhythm. Mark and Jennifer would rush out the door each morning, leaving Oliver in Melissa's care. At first, Oliver had been excited to spend his days with Melissa, eager for the games and adventures she promised. But as the weeks stretched on, a shadow fell over their time together. Started small, little things that Oliver couldn't quite explain. Melissa would forget to give him lunch, claiming she got too busy. She'd snap at him for the tiniest mistakes, her once warm smile twisting into something cold and cruel. You're such a burden, she'd hissed when Mark and Jennifer were out of earshot. They'd be better off without you, you know? Oliver would shrink into himself, fighting back tears. He wanted to tell his parents, to beg them to stay home with him. But Melissa's hold was too strong. She'd convinced him that no one would believe him, that he'd only make things worse. So Oliver suffered in silence, his once vibrant spirit slowly withering under Melissa's cruelty. He grew thinner, dark circles blooming beneath his haunted eyes. But still, he said nothing. Melissa reveled in her power, drunk on the control she held over Oliver's life. With each passing day, her torment escalated, the starving and emotional abuse taking a devastating toll. And still, Mark and Jennifer remained oblivious, too caught up in their own lives to see the monster in their midst. Across town, Daniel and Titan settled into their nightly patrol, cruising the quiet streets of the suburbs. It had been a long shift, filled with the usual assortment of petty crimes and neighborhood squabbles. But as they turned onto the Peterson street, Titan suddenly sat up straighter, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Daniel glanced at his partner, instantly alert. "What is it, boy? You sense something?" Titan's ears swiveled forward, his nose twitching as he stared intently at the Petersons' house. Daniel followed his gaze, scanning the seemingly peaceful home. Nothing looked out of place, but he knew better than to doubt Titan's instincts. He pulled the cruiser to the curb, watching the house for a long moment. Titan whined softly, his tail thumping against the seat. "Okay, buddy, we'll keep an eye on it," Daniel murmured, reaching for the radio to make a note of the address. As they pulled away, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. He had learned long ago to trust Titan's instincts, to listen to the subtle cues that others might miss. And right now, every fiber of his being was screaming that someone in that house needed help. He just hoped they wouldn't be too late. The next morning dawned gray and gloomy, mirroring the heaviness in Oliver's heart as he watched his parents drive away. Melissa stood in the doorway, a cruel smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Looks like it's just you and me again, Oliver," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Oliver said nothing, his eyes fixed on the floor. He knew what was coming, the hunger and the pain that would follow. But he was too afraid to fight back, too beaten down to cry for help. Melissa yanked him inside, her grip bruising on his skinny arm. "I think it's time for a little lesson in respect," she hissed, dragging him towards the basement stairs. Oliver's heart raced, terror flooding his veins. The basement was Melissa's favorite place to torment him, far from prying eyes and ears. He stumbled on the steps, earning a sharp slap from Melissa. "Useless," she spat, shoving him forward. In the dank, shadowy basement, Melissa towered over Oliver, her face twisted with cruelty. "Do you think anyone cares about you?" she sneered. "You're nothing, Oliver. Nothing but a burden." She lashed out, her open palm cracking against Oliver's cheek. He crumpled to the floor, silent tears streaming down his face. Melissa laughed, a high, awful sound that echoed in the gloom. "Cry all you want," she said, turning on her heel. "No one can hear you." With that, she marched up the stairs, slamming the door behind her. Oliver lay there in the darkness, his small body shaking with sobs. He was alone, trapped in a nightmare with no end in sight. And outside, life went on as normal, the neighbors going about their daily routines, unaware of the horrors unfolding right next door. But miles away, in a police cruiser patrolling the streets, Titan shifted restlessly in his seat, a prickle of unease running down his spine. Something was very wrong. The days crawled by, each one bleeding into the next in a haze of hunger and fear. Oliver grew gaunt, his once bright eyes dulled by pain and exhaustion. Melissa was careful, doling out just enough food to keep him alive, but never enough to satisfy the gnawing ache in his stomach. At school, Oliver's teachers began to notice the change in him. He was withdrawn, flinching at sudden movements and loud noises. They asked gentle questions, trying to coax the truth from him. But Oliver remained silent, too terrified of Melissa's wrath to speak up. One day, as Oliver limped into class, his teacher, Mrs. Evans, pulled him aside, her kind face creased with concern. "Oliver, sweetheart, is everything okay at home?" she asked softly. Oliver stared at the floor, his heart hammering in his chest. For a moment, he was tempted to tell her everything, to beg for help. But Melissa's warning echoed in his head. If he told anyone, she would make him regret it. "Everything's fine," he mumbled, pulling away from Mrs. Evans' gentle touch. She watched him go, a knot of worry twisting in her gut. Something was very wrong with Oliver, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She made a mental note to keep a closer eye on him, to watch for any signs of trouble. But as the day went on, the demands of her job pushed Oliver to the back of her mind. There were lessons to teach, papers to grade, a million little tasks that demanded her attention. And so, as Oliver suffered in silence, his chance for help slipped away. As the weeks stretched on, the Petersons' neighbors began to notice the change in Oliver's demeanor. Where once he had been a lively, cheerful child, Now he was a ghost, slipping silently through the neighborhood with haunted eyes and hunched shoulders. One afternoon, as Oliver trudged home from school, his neighbor Mrs. Larson called out to him from her garden. "Oliver, dear, would you like a cookie? I just baked a fresh batch." Oliver hesitated, glancing nervously at the Petersons' house. Melissa was always warning him not to talk to the neighbors, not to draw attention to himself. But the smell of warm chocolate chips was too tempting to resist. He crept closer, his mouth watering. Mrs. Larson smiled, holding out a plate of cookies. "Go on, take one," she urged. With shaking fingers, Oliver reached for a cookie, biting into it with a small sigh of pleasure. For a moment, he forgot about his hunger, about the constant gnawing in his stomach. Mrs. Larson watched him, her eyes soft with concern. "Oliver, you know you can always come to me if you need anything, right?" she said gently. "If there's ever anything wrong, anything at all, I'm here for you." Oliver swallowed hard, tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. He wanted so badly to tell her, to spill out the whole awful truth. But the fear was too strong, the grip of Melissa's threats too tight. He shook his head, backing away. I have to go," he mumbled, turning to flee. Mrs. Larson watched him go, her heart heavy with worry. She had seen the fear in Oliver's eyes, the way he flinched at her kindness. Something was very wrong in the Peterson house, but she didn't know what to do. With a sigh, she turned back to her garden, sending up a silent prayer for Oliver's safety. She hoped that someone, anyone, would see the truth before it was too late. Miles away, Daniel and Titan patrolled the streets, their minds never far from the Petersons' house. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong, that someone in that seemingly perfect home was in desperate need of help. He had tried to investigate to find some concrete evidence of abuse or neglect. But every time he knocked on the door, Melissa was there with a bright smile and a ready excuse. Oliver was at a friend's house or napping or too shy to come to the door. And without proof, Daniel's hands were tied. But Titan knew. He could sense the fear and pain radiating from the house, the silent cries for help that no one else could hear. And he was determined to do something about it. One afternoon, as they drove past the Petersons' house for the 100th time, Titan suddenly sat up straight in his seat. His ears pricked forward. Daniel glanced at him, his heart racing. "What is it, boy?" he asked, slowing the cruiser to a crawl. Titan whined, his nose pressed to the window. Daniel followed his gaze, squinting at the house. And then he saw it, a flicker of movement in an upstairs window, a small, pale face peering out from behind the curtains. It was Oliver, his eyes wide with terror. For a split second, his gaze locked with Daniel's, a silent plea for help. And then he was gone, yanked back into the shadows. Daniel's blood ran cold, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. He knew, with a sudden, bone-deep certainty, that Oliver was in grave danger. And he knew that he had to act fast. He reached for the radio, calling for backup. "This is Officer Cruz, requesting immediate assistance at 1522 Maple Avenue. Possible child abuse in progress. I repeat, child abuse in progress." Beside him, Titan quivered with anticipation, his muscles coiled and ready. He knew that the time had come, that he and Daniel were Oliver's only hope, and he was ready to do whatever it took to save him. Inside the house, Melissa flew into a rage, her face twisted with fury. She had seen Oliver at the window, and had seen the moment of connection with the police officer outside. And she knew that her carefully constructed web of lies was about to come crashing down. She grabbed Oliver by the arm, her fingers digging into his skin. "What did you do?" she hissed, shaking him roughly. "What did you tell them?" Oliver cowered, his heart pounding in his chest. "And nothing," he stammered, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't say anything, I swear." But Melissa wasn't listening. She dragged him down the hall, her grip bruising on his skinny arm. "You little liar," she spat, shoving him into the bathroom. "You think you can outsmart me? Do you think anyone cares about you?" She slammed the door, locking it from the outside. Oliver collapsed to the floor, his body shaking with sobs. He was trapped, alone and terrified, with no way out. Outside, Daniel and Titan leapt from the cruiser, racing towards the house. Daniel pounded on the front door, his badge held high. "Police, open up!" he shouted, his heart in his throat. There was no answer, just a chilling silence from within. Daniel tried the handle, but the door was locked tight. He glanced at Titan, his jaw set with determination. "We have to get in there," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Oliver needs us." Titan whined, his tail thumping against Daniel's leg. He knew what he had to do, the instinct thrumming in his veins. He backed up, his muscles bunching beneath his sleek fur. And then, with a powerful leap, he smashed through the front window, glass shattering around him like rain. Inside the house, Melissa froze, her eyes wide with shock. She had never expected the police to actually break in, to come crashing through her carefully constructed facade. She raced for the back door, her heart pounding in her ears. But Titan was faster, a blur of fur and muscle as he leapt at her, his teeth bared in a snarl. Melissa screamed, stumbling backwards. She grabbed for a vase on the counter, hurling it at Titan with all her strength. But the brave dog dodged easily, his focus never wavering. He lunged forward, his powerful jaws clamping down on Melissa's arm. She howled in pain, thrashing wildly. But Titan held on, his grip unbreakable. Behind him, Daniel burst through the shattered window, his gun drawn. "Police, don't move!" he shouted, his voice ringing through the house. Melissa froze, her face twisted with rage and fear. She knew that it was over, that her reign of terror had finally come to an end. Daniel moved forward cautiously, his eyes scanning the room. "Where's Oliver?" he demanded, his voice rough with emotion. Melissa just glared at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. But Titan knew. He released his hold on Melissa, bounding up the stairs with Daniel close behind. They found Oliver huddled in the bathroom, his small body shaking with sobs. Daniel holstered his gun, dropping to his knees beside the terrified child. "It's okay," he murmured, gathering Oliver into his arms. "You're safe now. I've got you." Oliver clung to him, his tears soaking Daniel's uniform. Titan nuzzled close, his warm breath ruffling Oliver's hair. And for the first time in months, Oliver felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark of light in the darkness. He knew that he was not alone, that he had friends who would stop at nothing to protect him. He was safe, he was loved, and he was finally free. The next few hours passed in a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. Paramedics arrived, their gentle hands checking Oliver for injuries as they loaded him into the ambulance. Daniel rode with him, never letting go of his hand, while Titan watched anxiously from the cruiser. At the hospital, doctors and nurses swarmed around Oliver, their faces tight with concern. They took X-rays and blood tests, documenting every bruise and scar on his fragile body. And through it all, Daniel stayed by his side, a constant presence of strength and support. When Mark and Jennifer finally arrived, their faces pale with shock and horror, Daniel was there to meet them. He explained everything, his voice rough with emotion as he described the months of abuse and neglect that Oliver had suffered. Jennifer burst into tears, her knees buckling beneath her. Mark caught her, his own eyes bright with anguish. "We didn't know," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We never imagined." Daniel nodded, his heart heavy with sympathy. He knew that the Petersons were not to blame, that they had been fooled by Melissa's careful lies and manipulations. But he also knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that Oliver would need every ounce of love and support they could give him. "It's not your fault," he said gently, placing a hand on Mark's shoulder. "You couldn't have known. But now that you do, Oliver needs you more than ever. He needs to know that he is loved, that he is safe, and that he will never be hurt again." Jennifer nodded, wiping away her tears with shaking hands. "We'll do whatever it takes," she vowed, her voice fierce with determination. "We'll get him the help he needs, the love he deserves. We won't let him down again." And as they gathered around Oliver's bedside, their hands clasped tight and their hearts full of hope. They knew that the journey of healing had begun. In the days and weeks that followed, the community rallied around the Petersons, offering support and comfort in any way they could. Neighbors brought casseroles and baked goods. Teachers sent cards and care packages, and friends offered shoulders to cry on and ears to listen. Mrs. Larson, the kind neighbor who had always suspected that something was wrong, became a constant presence in their lives. She sat with Oliver for hours, reading him stories and playing gentle games, her warm smile a balm to his battered soul. At school, Mrs. Evans worked tirelessly to create a safe and nurturing environment for Oliver, adapting his lessons and offering extra support to help him catch up. She knew that it would take time, that the scars of abuse ran deep. But she also knew that with love and patience, Oliver could heal. And through it all, Daniel and Titan were never far away. They visited often, bringing small gifts and words of encouragement. Their mere presence a reminder of the courage and strength that had saved Oliver's life. Slowly but surely, Oliver began to heal. He smiled more often, his laughter ringing out in the house that had once been filled with so much fear and pain. He started to play again, to explore the world around him with the wonder and curiosity of a child. And as the seasons changed and the years passed, the Petersons grew stronger, their love for each other deeper and more unshakable than ever before. They knew that they had been tested, that they had faced the darkest of storms. But they also knew that they had emerged stronger, their family forged in the fires of adversity. And at the heart of it all was Oliver, a small boy with a brave heart and an unbreakable spirit. He had suffered more than any child should ever have to endure, but he had not been broken. He had survived, and he had emerged into the light, a shining example of resilience and hope. As Oliver grew older, he began to understand the true impact of his story, the way that his suffering had touched so many lives. He saw it in the eyes of the survivors he met, the women and children who had endured their own nightmares of abuse and neglect. And he knew that he had a purpose, a calling to help others find the same strength and hope that had saved him. He became an advocate, speaking out against the horrors of child abuse and working tirelessly to raise awareness and funds for organizations that helped victims. He told his story again and again, his voice clear and strong, his message one of resilience and empowerment. And always, Daniel and Titan were by his side. They had become more than just his rescuers, more than just his heroes. They were his family, the unbreakable bond that had been forged in the darkest of moments. Together, they worked to make the world a better place, to shine a light into the shadows and bring hope to the hopeless. They knew that the battle was far from over, that there would always be monsters lurking in the darkness. But they also knew that they were not alone, that there were other brave souls fighting alongside them, other hearts full of courage and compassion. And as the years turned into decades, Oliver's story became a legend, a shining example of the power of the human spirit. It was told in whispers and in shouts, in classrooms and in courtrooms, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. Because Oliver had survived, he had endured, and he had emerged into the light, a beacon of hope for all those still trapped in the shadows. In the end, Oliver's story was not just about survival, not just about the triumph of good over evil. It was about the power of love, the unbreakable bonds of family and community that had sustained him through the darkest of times. It was about the kindness of strangers, the small acts of compassion that had kept him alive when all hope seemed lost. It was about the bravery of those who had risked everything to save him, the heroes who had charged into the darkness without a moment's hesitation. And it was about the resilience of the human spirit, the incredible capacity for healing and growth that lies within us all. Oliver had suffered more than most could imagine, but he had not been broken. He had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than ever before. As he stood before a crowd of survivors and advocates, his voice ringing out with passion and purpose, Oliver knew that his journey was far from over. There would always be challenges to face, always obstacles to overcome. But he also knew that he was not alone, that he had an army of love and support behind him. And as he looked out over the sea of faces, the tears and the smiles and the shining eyes, He knew that his story had a happy ending after all, not because the monsters had been vanquished forever, but because he had found the strength to keep fighting, to keep hoping, to keep loving. He had found his purpose, his calling, his reason for being, and he knew that no matter what the future held, he would never stop fighting for the lost and the broken, for the innocent and the afraid, because he was Oliver Peterson, the boy who had survived, the boy who had endured, the boy who had emerged into the light, and who would never, ever stop shining.